Good evening and welcome everybody. Seems like people have joined in. What we're going to do is we're going to start the next, call it like 10 more seconds. Just got. Perfect. So good evening and welcome everybody. On behalf of Citizens Bank, the Chamber and City of Wake, I hope you are joining us today feeling very safe and healthy. My name is Sikander Hashmi, and I'm a Vice President on a derivatives sales and trading desk at Citizens Bank, Massachusetts, as well as I am also a member of City Wake Advisory Board. City Awake is a Boston Chamber's platform to engage the next generation of leaders in discussion around the most important issues facing our region today. Today's program is presented in collaboration with the Collier Collection, which has been working hard to provide our community with social outlets during this time of isolation. The Collier Collection and City Awake focuses on accessing and ensuring that Boston is a welcoming space for all. As we all navigate through these challenging times, we know that COVID-19 has impacted many industries, including museums. In case you miss going to museum as much as I do, you're in for a real treat today. We're going to start with a brief clip of one of the MFA's virtual exhibitions going on right now. We will then have a moderated conversation with Makeeba McCreary, who we will formally introduce after the clip. This conversation will go for about 30 minutes or so before opening it up for an audience Q&A. So start thinking for your questions. We ask that you remain muted during the program and be sure to submit questions using the chat feature. I want to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page shortly after the presentation. And with that, thanks to MFA, it is time for the virtual peek at Writing the Future, Basquiat, and the hip hop generation, which was originally planned to open at the MFA in early April. The exhibition explores the post-graffiti moment in 1980s New York City. Basquiat became an iconic frontrunner for this transformational movement in contemporary American art, which resulted in an unprecedented fusion of creative energies that defied long-lasting racial division. To explore more on the elements of the exhibition and bonus features, head to mfa.org. Now let's take a look. Perfect. Thank you so much to the Museum of Fine Arts for sharing this clip with us. Once again, head over to mfa.org to learn more about this virtual exhibition. And if any one of you that might be having some internet issues was not able to see through it. Well, I'm now very pleased to introduce today's featured speaker, Makeeba McCreary, Chief of Learning and Community Engagement at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Makeeba has held her role since January of 2019 and has worked hard to integrate diverse perspectives into MFA's program. Makeeba is a passionate advocate of young people at the MFA, leading the charge on improvement to the school's group experience and new paid opportunities for high school and college students. Prior to joining the MFA, Makeeba gained experience in education, consulting, and psychology. In addition, she sits on the board of directors for a variety of local organizations. I'm excited to learn more about her journey. I'm sure you would be too. Makeeba, we are lucky to have you with us. Ready to get started?
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
let's get started. Perfect. Let's get started on your childhood. What were you curious or excited about as a child?
So full disclosure first, because we are Zooming and this is our new world, you all need to know that you might see a sighting of a 15-year-old or a dog or maybe a cat in the background. And so they are part of our journey tonight. But I would say that, you know, I grew up in a Boston that was in some ways very different than the Boston that we know today, and in some ways probably a lot of similarities. I think one thing that was dramatically different was that my parents were really one of the few interracial couples that I knew. My father was a Black man from Mobile, Alabama. My mom is a white woman from upstate New York, and they met here. And so I grew up in a city where there were places that I really was taught I could not go. And my parents fundamentally pushed me to have the agency to break down those barriers. And I think that was a very different experience for me as a child than probably some of my friends. And it's paid off, I think, in the long run.
Perfect. Growing up in Boston, obviously in the area, did you ever foresee yourself working for a museum, and let alone the Museum of Fine Arts, one of the best in Boston? How that as a journey?
I didn't. I certainly didn't. I was in the arts really avidly as a young person, and even in the theater. But I can't say that I really visited the museum many times other than with school, and maybe as an adult I would come for special exhibitions. And when I found out that this was an opportunity that was available, it was just the right moment at the right time, and it felt like a really important opportunity to be a part of opening those doors. Similarly to the doors that I explained my family, my parents opened for me, but to really have an opportunity to change some of the social fabric for the city of Boston and for young people, particularly young people of color who otherwise would not find their way to the museum.
Perfect. So it seems like you have gotten a variety of experience in different industries, just looking alone at your biodata. Before transitioning into the MFA role, have you, how have those experiences impacted the work you're doing now in the community engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the arts altogether?
Sure. I would say if I look back and think about all of my transitions, they were because I wanted to have more tools in my toolkit. I went from being a program developer in the nonprofit sector to working in policy because I knew that those were levers that I needed to have access to really make a difference. I went from direct service with an older population to moving to a younger population because I felt like the intervention needed to happen sooner. And at some point, I found myself with my own agency, my own company, where I got a chance to do collective impact work across various sectors, the corporate sector, the nonprofit, some public, and then found myself working in government, which was also a surprise. But I like to say that experience, I sort of got bit by the bug of public service, and really important to me to say that folks who are in public service work tirelessly. They do, and I think we're seeing that now more than ever. It's just evident. It didn't just start, but we're recognizing it in a way that I think is important to continue even beyond this moment. To be in service to a city of individuals is a huge responsibility, and the folks who are out there are just doing an incredible job of being on the front lines for us.
Perfect. And then since we are talking about young professionals and obviously part of the Young Professional Network, and you are involved in many diversity initiatives at your current position, what do you think about Boston as a city for those opportunities for the young professional entering into the job market now? How do you see that, the role of city that plays into the life?
This is, I think, a really manageable city for those folks who are transplants from other bigger cities that are further spread out. And we're close. We have neighborhoods that touch each other, and we have the ability to travel from one end of the city to the other without very much trouble when public transportation is working well. And I think it's really about relationships. I mean, you still have to do the work to forge those connections, but being able to both look back and reach out and say to people that are just a little bit behind you in terms of their professional growth, that you will share some information with them, and not being afraid to ask those folks who have been in the business longer than you for some help, for advice. The more active you are in doing both of those things, those two directions, I think the stronger a leader you are when you are growing into that space.
And I believe for young people as well, like Boston has one of the best teams in sports. So that is always a plus point when it comes to picking a city to call your own. I want to jump back to our original clip that we just recently saw about Basquiat. As Basquiat's art confronts class struggles, racism, and income inequality, how do you see his new expressionist painting made their way to the walls of international museums like the MFA? Despite having to go through virtual, the MFA team is committed to telling the story of post-graffiti artists who overcame great barriers to create the change in the world. Can you talk more about why this exhibition and Basquiat's work is important to showcase at the MFA?
Sure. Well, first, I should point out that this is the first Basquiat exhibition in the city of Boston. It's also obviously the first for the Museum of Fine Arts. And if I didn't know it when we first started talking about this and I joined the museum, far after it had already begun its design, I certainly know now that this is one of the most impassioned projects of the director, Matthew Teitelbaum. And so we asked the question on the exhibition side, how it's relevant in terms of the creation of the product that he made, the stories that he was telling. On the learning and community engagement side, what we ask is, how do we ensure that his work is relevant to the hip hop generation of today, right? Because my hip hop generation is very different than those that are appreciating that same context now, but very different political moment now than it was then, very different social parameters that are taking place in both the city and the country. And frankly, hip hop represented something to my generation that I think is different than what young people understand it to represent now, not better, not worse. So we're really proud to have the opportunity to create that moment of translation. And he was an incredible artist, and he died well before his rightful time. And so being able to continue to tell his stories and celebrate him is really an honor. It's a privilege.
Of course, he's one of my favorite young artists as well, and that's why one of the reasons that so many people who are joining in for this fireside chat is just a proponent of the fact that how impactful his work was in the youth. So just going on to the next question, most of us heard about the incident last May with a group of students that felt under, or if I must say, unwelcome at the MFA. This week, WVR published an article about the groundbreaking agreement the MFA and the Attorney General's office came to, which included dedicating almost $500,000 to diversity initiative and development of an anti-discrimination policy. Can you talk a little bit about that initiative and MFA has made, and any sort of further programs that MFA is organizing to combat with discriminatory issues?
Sure. I want to start by saying that when I joined the museum in January of 2019, a lot of this work really had been initiated just simply by my asking questions and starting to invite some of our partners from the outside to come in. Some of you are actually on this Zoom call today. I've seen you pop up. And we asked the question very explicitly, how can the museum be a more inclusive, welcoming place? Because we knew that it was something that was not a place that was being used aggressively by young people of color in particular. So when this incident happened, I would say that the first thing we had to really ask ourselves was, what needs to be in place to ensure that this is not something that takes place again? And a lot of that, from my perspective, was about what happens before they get to the museum, right? Like what their perspective is about what they're about to walk into, and the amount of apprehension that you bring into a situation where you are fearful or where there's an unknown is, the thing that really, I think, perpetuates often knowing that you're going to have a negative experience. And the museum is a daunting place. The museum it's got a lot of things that are easily interpreted as being unwelcoming, and some of it we can't control because we've got gorgeous, huge, rooms with lots of space, and it's cavernous, and you get lost trying to find the bathroom often. But some of it we can change, and we have really started to think about what that visitor experience looks like, and particularly for young people, what we need to do to help them learn about the museum, its collection, of the people who work there before they come to the building. And we have some incredible educator partners who have been working with us to make sure that we get that right. And so that's just an example of one of the things that we've been working on. We've also done a significant amount of training, which we all know in the DNI world is never the silver bullet, but for us it's an absolute start, and it's a necessary place to start. So we're opening the dialogue by introducing the idea that it's okay to talk about difference, it's okay to talk about race, and we have to continue to push forward.
Perfect. All right. That's really good that their museum is actually taking such amazing steps, including a very big grant that's $500,000 towards diversity, inclusion, let alone is unheard of in organizations around Boston. I believe we have another video to be shared with our guest speakers. So I would definitely ask Hannah to take a look at the video.
The core mission of graffiti art.
The core mission of street art.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hannah, for that. So at the beginning of this year, YW Boston honored you with the Academy of Women.
I have to tell you what that was. I have to tell you what that was. I don't know how well people saw. My internet's a little funky, but we're going to get this posted. You'll see it later. And I just want to give a shout out to the two artists that are featured in that you may not got a clip of, but Rob Stull, Pro-Black, and Rob Gibbs. Rob Gibbs, who is also known as Pro-Black, and Rob Stull, who is a very well-known comic artist and illustrator, have joined us as artists in residence at the museum. And that is actually a first. It's a first as an artist in residence, and it's a first as two Black men who are from the community, who are incredible artists. And they are joining us to create a mural project that accompanies the Basquiat exhibition. So there'll be more to share with you, but I wanted to give you guys a sneak preview. And when you see the recording of this, and also we're gonna be blasting that out on all of our social, you'll get to see the sort of pure version and teaser. But sorry to interrupt you, just wanted to make sure I got that out there.
No, perfect. Like, I apologize. The video lag seems to be happening on my side too, and the video kind of cut off. So I would go back to the question at the beginning of the year. YW Boston honored you with the Academy of Women's Achievers Award for your work integrating diverse perspective into the MFA's program and educational offerings to foster better understanding of current issues through the lens of art. As one of the few women of color in museum industry, can you talk more about the importance of integrating diverse perspectives?
Well, sure. I think that, I hate to say it's a no-brainer, but from my perspective, it is. That it's no fun to sit around and have conversations with people who have exactly the same perspective as you. You don't learn anything. You don't test anything new. But it does take some courage to be willing to share both your perspective and your ideas, and be open to getting somebody to push back and say, I actually see the world in a different way. So I think it's a critical sort of fundamental cornerstone to growth. And I would say that, you know, if you as an organization are interested in growing, then you have to be interested in being vulnerable in that sense.
Perfect. That's a good answer. On February 24th, the W.W. Kellogg Foundation featured a video of you where you spoke about how you recognize your philanthropy through how it manifests in those around you. Can you elaborate on what you meant by this and how it informs your work at the museum and with community partners?
Sure. If I recall, that interview actually was referencing my son and the fact that at some point I watched him start to be incredibly philanthropic independently, and I realized that, you know, it was because I had done that. I had that behavior as he was growing up, and that's something that made me really proud. So I think the question that Kellogg asked me was, how do you know that you are a philanthropist? And I said, well, I don't know that I am until I see my son emanating the same behavior. I think the way that it's manifested itself at the museum is in being able to just open up your arms and sort of generously say, we are willing to trade off. We're willing to give up something in order to get something else, and vice versa. And when you give up sort of the notion that the museum is only for a certain core audience, then you actually are able to invite in a whole nother group of individuals who are part of this community, and they teach us something as well. And I think it's reciprocal. So you, I think you find philanthropy in lots of ways. It's not always just a monetary exchange.
Perfect. And how do you think, other than just a career in the museum, what have you learned throughout your career about propelling equitable change that could be impacted through different industries, not just the museum?
That's a great question. I think that it makes me think about probably my last stint in public education. And, you know, parents are probably most passionate when they think their child is going to lose out on something. And so there's lots of equity conversations in the education sector. And what I like to say and remind folks of is that, you know, it's not like it's a pie and when you cut it up and all the slices are gone, there's nothing left, right? Like good education, it should be available for every child. It should be plentiful. And I think the same is true for any experience. You know, access should be available to everybody. You should be able to experience an incredible museum, and there should be no end to the number of people who can find themselves, the power of art, the healing nature of art. And in all of your industries as well, you know, I think the same is true. So that's sort of what I think of when you ask that question.
No, thank you so much for definitely shedding light on that. And obviously going back to the word that almost everyone has heard many times during the day, COVID-19. So the crisis that the world is facing right now, and, you know, the crisis has negatively impacted many industries. What is the museum's plan or hopes to bounce back once the business begins to reopen?
So this has been incredibly challenging. And I would say that we are both building it while we fly. We are learning how to become a different museum in many ways, and also relying on the security of knowing that what we have in our collection and what we have in our people is incredibly valuable and something that we have as sort of the stepping stone. But the reality is we're learning how to be in the virtual world, and it's not something that we really practiced before. I think the most exciting part of it for me is knowing that what we're learning now will benefit us for the long term. And we will forever find our way into the digital space now that we've forayed there. And I think that's exciting. It really does break down a lot of barriers. It creates access for a lot of people who otherwise may not have made their way to us. And as we slowly reopen, the reality is that we will not be able to be open to as many visitors as we're used to physically. And so we do want them still to take advantage of being able to visit us, just maybe in the cloud.
Definitely. And so like if you wanted to see like how the further impact of COVID-19 is on the DEI initiative, how would you like to highlight some of the impacts that are going on that directly impacts the DEI initiative?
Sure. I have the privilege of being a part of an organization called the Partnership, and on the Executive Council. And this represents, as many of you know, a lot of your companies. And you know, the thing that we talk about a lot is that in moments of crisis, in moments like this, the thing to double down on is the thing that is most fragile. So I think that any organization in this moment that doesn't actually refocus its energies and its finances and its commitment and values to ensuring that equity and access and diversity remain priorities will really backslide. It will lose a lot of ground. And so these are the times when I think you double down even harder.
Perfect. And then given that we have so many attendees from all over Boston, almost 75 plus to be exact right now, how could you advise in terms for the attendees to be more intentional in their efforts to support DEI efforts in their respective organizations that they are working at and in their private life?
So I think if it's your job, if it's the thing that's in your description and your title, I think you've got to remember that you have colleagues, that you have people that will help and that will hold your hand, and that it's not necessary to think that you're doing this work alone, which we often all feel like we are. We are often the only ones, right? We're the only person of color, we're the only woman, we're the only person who has diversity, equity, inclusion in their job description. And we all know that that's not really a route to success. And so I think one alternative is to create a stronger network, and we pull each other in to help do the work in our respective organizations.
Perfect. And one more question before we open it up for the Q&A from our attendees is, looking back at the history, the end of the Black Plague in Europe brought about a period of increased art and expression known as the Renaissance period. Similarly, after the Spanish flu and then the World War I, the world experienced a boom of the Roaring '20s. What role does art play in our collective healing, and how do you foresee the art scene will be impacted by the crisis in the years to come?
I've been on a lot of calls with organizations, the cultural organizations across the city, and you know, the city hosts this call once a week. There's hundreds of organizations, and they're all sizes. They're organizations of 1, they're organizations of 700. And I think the beautiful part about people who are in the arts, are in this sector, is that the first thing they think about is humanity. At least I'm generalizing, but what I have seen is that most of us first turn to how can we continue to be a safe space, a space that's regenerative? How can we offer opportunities for healing? And I've just seen so much of that happen. So I think it's in our DNA. And then, you know, we have to also continue to take care of ourselves, as you say, and you got to put the mask on yourself first. So I think that as we move toward a new Boston, a Boston that is, you know, safe and virus-free, we should retain that. We should retain this idea that we really have to take care of each other, and that we have to contribute to being a healthy community altogether.
Perfect. Makeeba, since we are waiting for the questions to be assembled, a little off topic, but not so much. Can you talk a little bit about your favorite hip hop artist that, given the exhibition is, who do you admire the most when it comes to like asking for your favorite artist from the genre?
Oh gosh, that is really hard. I have to think about that one. I'm afraid to say one because then I'll feel badly because somebody else won't get their shine. But I will say that
Perfect. So
I get a very warm, fuzzy feeling when I was just going to say I get a fuzzy, warm feeling when I think about
perfect.
That moment in time, my age at the time, and what I was doing. So.
Perfect. So I believe that questions are coming in. We are going to take the first question. You would definitely have to get back to us eventually, even after the meeting as well, for your most favorite. But the question that we are getting from Allison is, I've been thinking a lot about how to create community in the programs, and I run with my team right now when we are all physically distancing. So what are your tips for virtual community engagement?
Well, I'm learning just like the rest of us, the rest of you. So I think what's worked for our team is lots of forgiveness, lots of flexibility, and definitely embracing the idea that, you're in people's homes now and you're watching their family and their day to day. And it's, I think, important to acknowledge, if you're in a leadership role, that your team not try to continue to work the same way that they did when they were in an office, removed from all of those other pressures.
Perfect. Makeeba, so we're getting another question. I believe some of the people joined in a bit later in the conversation. So if you don't mind repeating, we did cover that. But can you share with us some of the new DNI initiative that MFA is currently working with? This is a question from Tony Kwame.
Sure. Hi, Tony. I would say that one place to go is our website. We have everything there. And so that's a good place to check in, and you can see a lot of the work we've done in the past. But the thing that I'm really proud of is obviously this mural project. It's going to be going up in front of the Ruggles Street Station on Madison Park High School's side of one of their buildings. And it's celebrating the work of an artist that I think his celebration is long overdue, but Rob Gibbs grew up just a few blocks from the museum. And so it's really a wonderful moment in time to see him acknowledged by our institution as well.
Thank you. The next question comes from Casey, and she wants to ask in terms of what is the support system right now for emerging artists, especially during the COVID-19 time?
I'm so sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, so can you talk about the support system for emerging artists, especially during the COVID-19 period, both for, in the diversity inclusion and if MFA has some sort of program for them? Yeah,
no, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that. The moment that we knew we had to start canceling our programs, the first thing that my team actually worried about were our artists. How are they going to continue to survive? We didn't want to contribute to their immediate crisis. And so we kept many of them engaged on contract for future performances and future opportunities. And then we actually figured out very quickly how to ask many of them to perform with us online so that they had a digital presence as well. And I saw that across a lot of other institutions, cultural institutions. They put their artists first.
Perfect. And then we can dovetail into the next question. I believe the last name of the person is Liswego. The first initial is H only. So that's a really good question about curation. So can you talk a little bit about art curation and the lack of diversity in that field as it kind of matches with artists?
Yeah, I saw that question. I'm glad that that was asked. You know, I have the privilege of working with two artists, two curators of color in particular. Achille Tomasino was born and raised in New York, and he talks about what that barrier is often, even though he represents really the opposite, which is he was exposed to the museum and to art from a very young age. And he was told by his parents, his mother in particular, that that was a place that he belonged in and that he absolutely could pursue that opportunity. But it's an industry where you need to have a lot of relationships, where you need to have a very strong network, and where you need to have a pretty strong academic background. So for those of us who only find out later in our teens or even in college that it's even a thing, we're already behind. That's not entirely different from a lot of other industries, but I think it is acutely problematic for the art history space. And so that's one of the barriers to that.
Perfect. And then any advice you would give a young artist who is actually moving to Boston in the middle of this pandemic season? How to kind of stay focused, or are there any resources available through the MFA platform for the artist help?
Well, we are ramping that up very quickly, and so I would say check back in with us in another week or so. But what we're hoping to do is expand our programming, working with folks who are truly vulnerable. And so we're looking at how you use our collection to support individuals who have memory loss, individuals who were previously incarcerated, individuals who are young and maybe sort of on the edge of choosing which direction they're going to go in their life, whether that's a positive way or perhaps a way that is challenged. And so we want to be an intervention in that sense, and we want to be seen as a place where you can find those opportunities to be restorative.
Perfect. And Meredith is asking another good question. As you mentioned about building while as you fly during the COVID-19 crisis time, are there any excited emerging ideas that came across from adapting to this new normal situation, as you talk about just grasping the situation as it comes through? Are there any new things that you figured out in your process?
Yeah, so it's a great time because everybody's experimenting and everybody is reinventing themselves. So we've been approached by some incredible digital experts who want to find their way into the museum world and space. I'm working on a beta version of our Women Take the Floor exhibition right now with two designers who have helped us move it from just a virtual exhibition to what I'm calling an immersive experience, where you would go into the exhibition and you find materials that you can download for your children, and you can watch a video, and you can maybe even attend some sort of a Zoom session with 3 other people to talk about a painting. So that's been really exciting, and hopefully we'll get that up and going and you can all see it shortly.
Okay. And then have you seen any sort of synergies between different museum as an industry, as MFA takes a front foot towards going virtual? Have you seen recently a synthesis or a combined idea from various institutions within the museum world that is new and definitely being applied in the industry right now?
I have colleagues, a colleague at the Brooklyn Museum who managed to get up and running on their sort of first Fridays, their event evening, before a lot of us did. And it is a great model. They figured out how to bring in live performance with also pre-recorded performance, and to use the collection as the backdrop. And so we're all learning this together, but not just choosing one modality to share your product through, but figuring out ways to sort of weave in all of them together so that it does feel more dynamic, but also so you can control it and you can, it's a bit more polished.
Perfect. That's really nice. And then in terms from a MFA perspective, have you seen any talks about the return of the First Friday? Because I believe that was like my favorite event going in First Friday of the month. Has there been any chatter, any rumors? We want to know more about that.
Oh, we do too. Yeah, that and late nights are going to be the thing that I think we all miss the most for a little while. And you know, until it's safe for us to be in a space together en masse, we're going to find other ways to do that. One of the things we're sort of thinking about is how we partner with other organizations across the city to have, for example, Latinx Heritage Night is really important to me, or Indigenous Peoples Day. These are, and of course, you know, the support that Citizens brings with the Martin Luther King Day. You know, thousands and thousands of people that show up in the museum, and there's an energy there that we're going to miss. And so we want to think about how to recreate that, and we're going to have to get very creative. Perfect.
And then, you know, like one of the questions I believe that you've answered in like slight is like, can you talk a little bit more about what radical welcoming changes are made for MFA for art being accessible as an accessible commodity in the community? MFA taking an additional approach towards that topic, to making art more accessible to community.
Yeah. One of the things I've been wrestling with from the first day I walked in was how you both honor what exists at the museum, but also how you honor what exists in the surrounding communities who are also vibrant with art makers and with institutions and with programs. And so one of the things that we're actually really pushing forward now on even more so is how the museum can partner with other organizations like the Roxbury Cultural District, for example, and I know Kelly is on tonight. You know, they have incredible gifts, and we don't have to always sort of push our stuff out, but we could go out and amplify what's in existence. And I think that's a thing that I want to spend more time working on and thinking about.
Perfect. And, you know, I wanted to also ask, given that the COVID time is very negatively impacting some of the youth, given, you know, social distancing, do you have any advice, professional, for the young professions and the words of wisdom about how to stay motivated during these times? What to do? What are you doing? What are you suggesting the young equitable partners in your organization to combat this psychologically?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert here, but I think I do best when I remind myself that I can take the time right now that I will not have otherwise to learn something new, or to spend a little bit more time reading about an area that I've not had the privilege of exploring. And I can even pick up the phone and call somebody and just have a conversation. I've had more touch points with people that I never get to talk to anymore when you're running around physically. So, you know, I think we all have to figure out how to find that silver lining, how to take care of ourselves, and know that there will be a day when this, you know, we go back to being together. And I think we're learning a lot. So we should probably take all of the good lessons we're learning and move to the future with them.
Perfect. Makeeba, there is another question that just popped up. I know that we are towards the end, but I would definitely would like to forward. Like, what role do you think mentors play in the journey for an artist? And what role, if there a mentor that you had in your career, how did they help you out? Do you want to talk about examples, or like how important it is to have a mentor, especially during these current times?
Sure. So I think first you have to really differentiate between a mentor and a sponsor. And we all use sort of different language in our worlds, but you know, they are different. And so I'm going to talk about a mentor from the perspective of somebody who's really invested in your personal growth as a person, and that might be professional as well, but really as an individual, no matter what job you're holding. A sponsor I tend to think of more as the person, the individual who is either site specific and can help you navigate through an institution and get to a higher altitude, or somebody who's just sort of able to help you navigate in a larger context. And the mentors I've had, I have to say, the best mentors I've had have told me the truth. They have not sugar-coated. They've been very loving, very caring, but they've allowed me to really ask the questions that are sometimes hard to hear the answers to. And then they've allowed me to come back and say, did I get it right? Am I getting better? And that's invaluable.
Perfect. So it is almost towards the top of the hour, but unfortunately we are running a little bit out of time. Makeeba, I know that we have asked a couple of questions about wisdom and general idea about your career. Do you have any parting words or pearls of wisdom you wanted to share with the youth before we cut off the Q&A section?
I would just double back to the part of the conversation we had about reaching back and bringing people forward with you. I don't think there's anybody who's too young or too junior to think about what they have to offer the person who's just standing right next to them or right behind them. And also that you should take control of your future, and you should demand that people teach you, obviously in a not such a aggressive way, but you should have an expectation that those of us who are further along are going to be able to take the time and find the moments to give you what you need. I would say be very specific about what you need, and try to ask the right people for the right things, but just ask. You have to ask, and you have to also offer.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Before we close, I want to highlight that the Boston Chamber of Commerce and City Awake have a packed digital calendar as well. Every Friday, you'll find skill-based webinars as part of the #SkillsUp series, and I have to practice saying that, #SkillsUp. So definitely use that. You can learn more by going to bostonchamber.com and for signing up for their newsletter that normally will send you updates for any new event, especially during the social distancing time. You will get many updates in terms of the next event coming up. Once again, thank you all for joining, and thank you, Makeeba, for all your incredible insight, amazing words of wisdom, and giving us a little bit of sliver from your time and during this current time to give us support, especially for a topic like arts and inclusion, which normally is overlooked in our society. So thank you so much. And we will be uploading the video if anybody wanted to go back and reference the Q&A section and the history and Makeeba's career. And we wish Makeeba very best of luck for the role at MFA, and hopefully things are going to go back to normal and we will be able to visit the great MFA museum once again.
Thank you. I hope to see all of you.
Thank you. All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.